This is Monday, December 10th, 2012. We're calling Athens City Council into session. It's 7 o'clock now. We have two things happening tonight. First, there is a Planning and Development Committee meeting. Our chair, Chris Fall, is not here, but I believe a member of the committee, Elahu Ghazni, is going to take over. And then we have a special session to deal with some ordinances that need to be dealt with before the end of the year. So we will turn it over to Member Ghazni for Planning and Development.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda tonight is regards to the proposed rezoning of the Far East Side. And we did get a little bit of advice from our law director within the past 2 weeks. Pat, if you want to just mention briefly what you concluded.
Yeah, without going into too much of the detail on that, just because I don't want to bog things down too much here tonight, the basic gist of the question was whether or not this issue was ripe for consideration by council. Some objections had been raised at a previous public hearing in which some areas of the code were pointed out, and while those areas were accurate that were pointed out, they were, in my opinion, and those others who have looked at this, they were not applicable to this particular case. And so, long story short, I do believe that this is ripe for council consideration. That said, there may be some very good reasons for deciding to reject the recommendation made by the Planning Commission. However, at this time, I think that it is ripe to be on council's plate. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from council members regarding this proposed rezoning at this time?
Yes. Several, I know that we've all been considering this and also taking into consideration the comprehensive plan and looking at some of the items there that are mentioned, including in the phase 2 of the implementation, several recommendations on future land use and regulatory measures. And the mayor has provided copies of this for council members tonight. And but the 3 bullets listed include local zoning and subdivision regulations should suffice for new construction. Then the residential portion of the neighborhood should remain zoned R1 and R2 with perhaps a stricter definition and enforcement of family units. And then also calling for special attention to not exclude group homes in the residential zone districts. And also then bringing up the point that was mentioned earlier by one of the citizens who appeared last night, that that much of the neighborhood should be designated as neighborhood conservation area. And then there is also an update that we received from an advisory group, and this was that I did an update and on the comprehensive plan, and they had some recommendations as well. And if you'll give me just a moment, I will find them in my papers, and I'll leave time for other people to comment.
Thank you. Other comments from council members? Mayor?
As I gave you the implementation, phase 2, sections 113 to 115 about the neighborhood. It does point out that there is having reread it, I realize it's trying to keep it low density, of course. Commercial encroachment in the neighborhood should be prohibited. Also, they talked about buffering between the B3 zone and the R zone. But again, as you say, the last 3 bullets there, in terms of that local zoning and subdivision regulations should suffice for new construction, and the residential portion of the neighborhood should remain zoned R1 and R2, perhaps stricter definition of enforcement of family units. And it says family in quotations. We're not sure how that means. So pretty much that's the take home for it as a look at the future part. Again, some of the other things, of course, is turning and adding sidewalks, I noticed, which we actually put as a low priority in that region. I'm not sure why, except that we didn't get a lot of pushback on it or desire for it at the time. And the other thing, of course, I realized we need to be working on, which with the advisory Comprehensive Plan Advisory, and not related to zoning, was, of course, a designation of the neighborhoods, distinct identity, whether gateways or such identifications. So when I look at this, I realize those things that we should be doing as well as the things we've done. So again, this is just reiterating what you know already. And that's why I brought it out, because it pays to look at the history. It's not just sitting on the shelf.
Well, thanks for bringing that to our attention.
I have one other note.
Yeah,
Just
please.
a note here on the comprehensive plan, under the 3 bullet points, infill development opportunities. And it does say the residential portion of the neighborhood should remain zoned R1 and R2 with perhaps a stricter definition, as you just mentioned, Mayor. But then it goes on to say special attention must be given to not exclude group homes in the residential zone districts, which I thought was an interesting comment that the comprehensive plan would have made, which, anyways, that was a recommendation at one point in the comprehensive plan. Certainly, we do need to pay attention to the R1 and R2 as they abut a business zone, which is what we've been talking about for months now. That's why we're all here. But that is noted as a bullet point.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just had a question. The mayor mentioned buffering, but didn't go any further than that. But what would buffering look like in between zones?
There's a lot of, okay, let's see, that should be 114. Key problem is the condition of buffer areas between the commercial uses along the north side of East State Street and the residential sections of the neighborhood. These areas were unappealing and consisted mostly of parking lots with little or no landscaping or fencing with little or no landscaping or fencing that was in disrepair. Additionally, it seems the commercial encroachment in residential occurring along the east side of Graham Drive. Regulatory initiatives proposed elsewhere address the need to better buffering requirements within local zoning. I believe that there's been discussion on the tree commission on that, but that should be something probably not in tree commissions, because they just think it's shade trees. Many zoning codes require that when dissimilar land uses are proposed to abut each other, certain landscaping screening required are triggered. So I guess that would be something that we need to look at.
So it's basically landscaping.
Fences, vegetation, decorative elements to block views that might diminish property values.
Thank you.
And that type of buffering is, I believe, a requirement for new construction.
Some of it is, some of it isn't. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay.
And, if you're talking about subdivision regs, I think it's there. In terms of new construction, I don't know how much it is per zone.
Okay.
We'd have to look at that.
Very nicely, did you find?
Oh, I did find, and part of it picks up on what Mayor Weil was saying of the continuing the sidewalk repair and then additional measures for aesthetics in the neighborhood, but then also develop a comprehensive housing strategy to address occupancy and affordability issues, and then also developing a housing plan that includes incentives for homeownership.
And this was a 2010-11 update.
Correct. It was the Comprehensive Plan Review Advisory Commission report.
All right. Do we have any members of the audience that would like to speak on this issue tonight? Welcome.
Thank you, Bill Walker. As I indicated 2 weeks ago, and Jim, I'll keep it to 3 minutes. Thank you for the time. And I do appreciate the council members, what they've looked at up to this point. But I do represent, as indicated previously, the Goods and Good Incorporated, and they own presently the B3 or 5 B3 lots, as we discussed, that are proposed to be rezoned R1. I have, and I will present these. May I approach the
Yeah, please.
again? Thank you. There are 7 or 8 of copies here. I'll just give them to Jim Green and hand them out. It won't take the time at this point. But I just want to indicate that the arguments have been presented here over the period of this discussion by, if I would refer to them as the petitioners in this matter, have all kind of dwelled on and focused on the valuation and the devaluation of their property. As a result, I'm going to be quite frank, of this Graham Drive issue, which seems to be the initiative here, that housing down there, which now has 4 women in it and 8 children that are homeless and are living in there. And I don't think they've caused too much difficulty for the neighborhood. But their argument is that it's devaluating their property. Well, I would assert that the Goods here, who really have had no stake in this other than going to a meeting in May in which they saw that their rezoning, or the zoning proposal was going to keep their property R2, now they're in a situation that their values are going to, or their property is going to be devalued. And we have presented to you some estimates on that as it relates to the value of their property. If you just take it from a fair market value perspective. And then if you look, if they put a duplex in there, which they would be able to do it on R2, we have indications there from our realtors to the loss of value that they would incur over a 1 year and a 30-year life expectancy with regards to it. So it's a two-edged sword in terms of the valuation of the properties. The petitioner's argument is devaluating their property, put duplexes in there or housing, which I would assert could be for low-income families. I'm not saying it has to be homeless, but if you put a duplex in there, someone who can't afford a home can now have the opportunity to move into a residential area and live in a residential area in an apartment complex or a duplex. And we're going to exclude that. We're going to homogenize this area. And quite frankly, are we going to lead into other areas of homogenization in this city if we're not going to permit the potential for duplexes or housing that can assist people that maybe don't have the income levels that you and I have. So in the long term, I think we're homogenizing the areas, and then we're also devaluating the property of the Goods, who really have no stake in this, had no interest in this, had no one, they weren't a dog in this fight. And then all of a sudden, after the May meeting, which they thought everything was fine, now they're facing the issue that they're going to lose their property, which is R2, that they've invested in over a period of time, and it's going to turn into R1. And if you look at the maps that I presented to you previously, they're surrounded by B3 areas. So now their R2s are going to become R1. There's no buffers, and it's going to be completely surrounded by B3s if you look at the map that I provided to you previously. Finally, there's been discussion here on this grandfathering, that some of the R2s are R1s, but they're grandfathered in, so the duplexes can remain the same. They can remain on there. We're not going to remove them. They're not going to be jeopardized by this change of R2 to an R1. Now, Goods are not in that situation because these are vacant lands, which we're talking about, but there are some areas that they're proposing now that are R2 be rezoned R1, but they're grandfathered in. But what's the zoning code say about grandfathering? It says that if that property loses 65% of its true value by the auditor's office, it's by a fire, it's destroyed, it can't be rebuilt. You've got someone who's put a major investment on an R2 piece of property today, that could be a duplex, rent it out and receive an income off of that, who has a substantial destruction of that property to the extent of 65% of its true auditor's value, and they have no ability to rebuild that. They have lost their R2 zoning, and now they're R1 because they lost that building under the zoning code because of that destruction. They cannot rebuild, replace that property. So I understand what they're saying. Hey, we're not taking away those duplexes, but they could be if there was a fire loss there or some destruction that would lead to its diminution of 65% of the county auditor's true value. So thank you. I've taken up my 3 minutes. But I think you got to look as well at the Goods valuation here, what they have invested in this and how it's going to impact it. And quite frankly, do we want homogenized zones? Do we want homogenized areas for people to live in? All R1s, with no abilities for someone with lower incomes to come in there, rent, or utilize or the ability to reside in these areas. So with that, I would ask again that the council either amend the proposed zoning to reinstate the R2s or send it back to the Planning Commission for its review. Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the time you've given us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the audience? Please.
Hi, I'm Jeff Dill. I live at 31 Graham Drive, and I've been involved in this since the beginning. First, zoning is inherently homogeneous. The whole point of zoning in R1 is to have low-density, owner-occupied homes, and I think what Bill was arguing is if you follow his logical conclusion, there shouldn't be any zoning anywhere, and people should just be able to build whatever they want. Now, I don't want to quibble about where the line is drawn, okay? But from the very beginning, our main purpose is to recognize the fact that most of the structures in the current R2 zone are already built as single-family homes. And we were hoping to recognize that so that there aren't conversions of single-family homes to duplexes going forward. And the comprehensive plan says that this whole neighborhood should be low-density, owner-occupied homes and a neighborhood conservation area. And if the line needs to be drawn slightly differently, some of my neighbors might object, but I personally wouldn't object to that. But I don't want the whole thing to be dropped. I would like to move the line down as far as reasonable and as far as possible to recognize the existing single-family homes and make sure they're rezoned as R1 so that they can't be converted to duplexes. Okay?
Thank you for your input. Anyone else? Any other comments from council members? Okay, so we have, at this point, we won't make any decision tonight. I think we should leave that to Planning Committee Chair Chris Fall. We will, in the near future, have to make a decision on whether we take this up from the Planning Commission at all. If we do, we can either accept their recommendation to rezone all of the R2 zone to R1, or we could also modify what the recommendation was, if we feel like that would be best. So I assume early next year we will have probably a decision on what council plans to do with this issue. So thank you to everyone for your input on this.
Okay, we will move along and give everybody...
We do have one other item.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
One other item on the committee tonight is the AEP franchise agreement that we did see earlier this year. Just to refresh everyone's memory, this is an agreement between the city and AEP that allows them to use the public right-of-way to deliver electricity in the city. The old agreement was in place from the mid-'80s, I believe.
86, 25 years.
86 until 2011. And when it came time to be renewed, several people wanted us to address tree trimming in there, which we have done. I was also interested in looking at the possibility of utilizing this as a tool to work on our energy use and energy efficiency in the city through some type of negotiation, whether it would be a franchise fee that the city could then dedicate towards that purpose, or other mechanisms. We have not made any progress in the last 6 months on that part of it. It is coming up for expiration again, though. I hate to keep kicking it down the road, but I would like another chance to address the environmental aspect of this. What I would propose would be another 6-month window to see if we can get anything inserted into the agreement that could address environmental issues in some way, and then have hopefully a more long-term solution at that time. And I'll entertain questions. Or comments, of course, also. Yeah, Ken.
Perhaps for viewers' sake and/or those of us on council that maybe aren't as familiar with your good intentions to address the energy agreement or energy needs, are you able to comment loosely on maybe a basic outline of that idea or concept?
Briefly.
Sure.
So So when this came up for renewal, from research I did, ICLEI, ICLEI, which is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, they publish a government guide, and the city has been a member of this group. And the guide is best practices for climate protection. And they point to franchise agreements that Ann Arbor has. Of course, it's Michigan, which has different regulations somewhat than what we have. But in Ann Arbor's franchise agreements, and it's a different situation in terms of the utility providers that are available, but they have several items in there, including a green power option, so customers have the ability to request from their electricity provider that it comes from a green source. I'm not sure we have the authority in Ohio to do that. They have a renewable energy portfolio. In Ohio, we have a statewide one, and so that might not be totally appropriate here. But if you look at the Region 5 EPA, they also have similar comments and suggestions that cities should try to utilize these in some way to address climate change or environmental issues. They state that it is, let me flip to the right page here. So this is our regional EPA. Bear with me. They funded a study that looked at franchise agreements in this region, and they say that they represent a largely unused opportunity for municipalities to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy. In the city of Athens, for example, one of the items that we could consider would be charging a franchise fee in order for AEP to use our public right-of-way. And then that money could be dedicated by city ordinance to be used for energy efficiency or renewable energy purposes in the city. And so we would have to define exactly what purposes those would be. But that would be one example of something that we could do. Ultimately, that cost would likely be passed on to the ratepayers in the city, so the customers in the city. And so just to make sure everyone's clear on that, it's not like we would be getting anything for free here. It would be at a probably passed on to the customers, but it's one possibility. Yeah, Member Rice.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but since they're using, or want to use the public right-of-way, AEP is in effect getting something for nothing. They're getting clear space, very convenient access, and we say, sure, why not? Am I wrong on that?
That's my opinion.
So we don't, as of yet, say, well, you really should pay for it. Because if we said, you know, we really don't want you to use them anymore, come up with an alternative, but you're going to have to pay for it out of your pocket. Well, but they do.
We wouldn't have electricity.
No, we'd have electricity. They can't refuse. They can't refuse us electricity. They'd have to use their own right-of-ways.
I agree with what you're saying, that it is something for nothing, and I would hope that we would be able to come to an agreement that the city and AEP would both be okay with. And so wouldn't
Don't we
avoid-
have franchise fees in any other, do we have franchise fees in?
No, we haven't been able to locate an agreement
With-
for the gas that runs underneath our ground or anything like that, so.
How about our
There's
cable
a-
TV?
There's a cable fee.
Well,
Cable
that's
there is,
different.
but that's actually, I think that got bumped to the state.
It's handled by the state.
Yeah.
of
Used to be
course.
our negotiation, but it fell through the cracks because it's, Time Warner's so big, we're so small, and then the state took it over.
Yeah.
I guess a procedural kind of question, just because I know that you've been involved with this, as has the city. So we had an agreement, it approached expiration, we said, let's work on some new elements to it. We didn't achieve what we were hoping for our city end of it by the time the end of the extension. So now we're considering extending again. Is there anything, I guess that it's to ask, is there any downside or negative effect of that extending by the 6 months, any detriment to the city?
I would say not. And And in this one that was adopted for this past year, indeed put in the tree trimming, the ANSI standards, so it's not like the negotiations didn't produce any
Right,
fruit,
right.
you know, it's
Just not as much, all of what we wanted to.
Yeah, we were successful in getting language in there related to tree trimming.
The caveat there, of course, that they talk about tree trimming, preventive maintenance versus emergency. In other words, following the ANSI standards, the tree standards of trimming would kind of fall by the wayside if there's a derecho where they have to just clear things out to get the lines up again. I think that was one of the sticking points in the conversation. The other ones we had conversations were, of course, is that some of the light poles that we do have, electric poles, actually have Wi-Fi on them. So in other words, they're piggybacking, IntelliWave or whatever company does that is got a negotiation with AEP to use the poles that are in our right-of-way. And that was one of the discussions as well. And again, a 6-month extension may not make a difference. They were having trouble trying to wrap their head around this. You might want to send that information out to all the council members sometime, just as background. On the other hand, you know, the mandate to do renewable energy and alternative energy by 2025, I believe, there's pressure to that. It's been knocked about in the Columbus State House that's you know, a job killer and is going to prevent, and so therefore we could actually lose that aspect of the greening that's required that we'd like to see happen. So there are things in play here. So well, how to address it and whether we can get anything different is another matter entirely. You know, it would take a concerted effort and probably more dialogues than we've had in the past.
One thing Mr. Buck did request is a longer extension. Ideally, he'd like a 5-year extension of what we have in place right now. But I just wonder if council would consider a little bit longer with the idea that we'd hope to reach something prior to the end of the expiration. He stated if we went back to the table, which it sounds like we will, regarding some of the other issues, that there would be other departmental divisions that would have to be incorporated into the negotiation, as it were. So
That would seem to be appropriate.
And we did vote in an electric aggregate, didn't we? An opt-out system about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So that's not really leveraged because that's a different part of the company. But the fact is that's another negotiation tool too, for if you want to talk about green energy. And you did a lot of that homework already. You know that as well as I. So.
Personally, I'd be uncomfortable passing a 5-year extension without negotiating first because it seems that there's no need to negotiate at that point.
I think we all decided that 25 years was too long. I knew that much. They like longer, we like shorter. So the question is how short.
And the franchise fee item itself, that is something that other cities across the country do. It's a patchwork. Some receive free electricity from the utility. Some charge a couple percent of the revenues. It's done differently by the different cities that I could find that have something in place like that. Yeah, over about there.
Thank you. I just had a quick question and then clarification again. So I'm correct in understanding that in the discussions, the tree trimming concerns were addressed because that's something that many of us on council had received complaints about in the past. Correct? That was discussed, right? Okay. That was something I wanted to reiterate. And then if I'm hearing you correctly, from the executive branch, you're suggesting that this delay to look into more of the concerns that Member Gosney is suggesting or curious about, you're in support of that as well.
The agreement we have ends the 31st of December, so we don't have a lot of negotiation time or even discussion time. An extension would help us to do some more homework and see if we could take another running shot at it, but at least be able to make sure this is what we want. And behoove everybody to look at it and see if this is how it goes. And what our limitations are. For all we know, we don't have power to do one thing or the other. Probably a conversation with PUCO or something like that would help too.
Yeah, Michelle.
So if we do go forward with an extension, would someone on council be part of the negotiations? Is that how you worked it in the past?
Who sat in on
He sat in most of
there
it.
for this meeting too.
Okay. And so that hasn't happened for about 6 months, or did anything?
Probably, that's
Yeah.
probably about right.
Yeah.
And I could see, you know, if we went, say, through the July, because then you go on recess, that allows us and affords us that time, so that'd be more like a 7-month. And I would like to state, for example, they cut trees on Columbus Road in order to get emergency backup power in place for the nursing home that's on Columbus Road. They've already committed to replacing all those trees.
thank
Not
you.
in that location, but other
Sure.
places for our bank. So that, those kinds of communication are significantly better.
Great.
Now, if I can just get them to get all those shoes down off the line.
But part of those are on the telephone wires and part of them on the electric wires,
Right.
so.
And that all occurred around the derecho and when all that happened this summer, because there was a lot of things. I know we were communicating with AEP because of some of the other concerns.
And that's something probably we should go back to talking about also, is the, how do you address your critical population, the fragile population?
Exactly.
How best to do that. So.
Yeah.
I guess it'd be a point of procedure. Suppose our current agreement expires, what's the downside?
Both our legal counsel, Mr. Lang, and their legal counsel did not think that was a good idea.
Well, it's not a good idea, but what is the downside? I mean, practically speaking, nothing really changes, does it? I mean, electricity still flows, they still do their thing.
Well, they could probably say we can't fix the wires because we don't have
Of an
access
agreement.
to the right-of-way.
Yes, and we could say, well, you don't have access to the right-of-way, so I guess you'll have to pull up your stuff and put it someplace else.
Okay,
Can
so
I bring Jeff to the
the citizens in
negotiations?
your ward would say what when they don't have electricity?
That's common out there, we don't complain about it anymore.
After 2 days and the water heaters are kind of cold.
Yeah, we went through 9 days
Yeah,
of
they
it.
went through a long time.
Yeah,
Sounds
9
like
days, 9 days without power on the south side.
I don't know what the downfall would be if it did just expire. I know that there's protection in there from the city having liability for their equipment and the lines, so that would be one downfall, is that we would not have that contractual liability that we have, or protection from liability that we have in the agreement. Chris, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, just more of a philosophical than a legal one, that, I hear what you're saying, so what if we just let it expire? But I think what that points to is then a lack of collaboration or cooperation. We're trying to do a combination of things, I think, cooperate with them and as well as negotiate. So, in a way, to me, I, would see it almost as a downside to just say, well, tough luck, we're going to let it expire, and rather than trying to move forward with it, so.
Well, thank you all for the feedback. Jim, did you have?
There was some discussion about a longer time versus 6 months, 7 months was mentioned. Is a year better? I mean, can we run it, this extension from January 31st to January 31st? Is that a better?
I think that affords us greater time to try to get to an agreement that we could present perhaps for a 5-year term.
A 1-year extension would work. Realize, of course, that next year is an election year for all you gals and guys, and it probably wouldn't affect anything that's going on, but you never know the distractions that can occur. I don't think it'd be an issue one way or the other. And as I say, if we put it 6 months, the idea is that we'd be doing all the homework with the idea we have a deadline for 6 months. For a year, though, we could actually get, if we really worked hard, we could get it all by July recess and have it kind of squared away. Again, it requires, probably, I would suggest more than just Oahu on a meeting basis, negotiation basis, whether it's city services as a committee or, this is planned development, but this is part of it too, but it blends to several.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
And I would encourage to go with the 7 months rather than the year. I just think that this has already been out there for 6 months. And if we put it off for, if we say a year, you know how things happen in life. It kind of ends up being that long. So I don't know, it puts a little more pressure on solving the problem or coming to the resolution. That's my comment on it.
Okay. Well, we will have a draft renewal for next Monday. I guess we'll decide the final expiration of that renewal by then. Paula, could I ask you tonight, you don't have to do it tonight, but could you try to schedule a first meeting with Mr. Buck for January?
Sure.
That way we'll make sure we get rolling early next year.
And again, this would be amending, 05912?
5-9, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and probably an emergency clause, I imagine? Is that what's needed? Okay.
And we will have to vote on this next week. All right, well, Thank you all. I believe that's it for planning and development.
Now we really will vote. Okay. To our special session, we have several ordinances for third reading and quite a few ordinances for second reading. We do have a quorum. There are 6 members present with 1 absent. And we have the law director here to tell us if we're
I know, John's
doing something really stupid.
So far, so good.
Okay. Ordinance 11812, an ordinance amending Athens City Code, Title 11, Business Regulations, Chapter 11.04, Vending, Peddling, and Soliciting, and declaring an emergency. Member Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance 11812.
Second.
Thank you. Again, this ordinance was really updating the vending code or the vending ordinance as it exists. A few changes just to highlight them. Number 1 was making clear some definitions, such as buyback, what a buyback business would be, which is any business that is purchasing wares from the public, which does not fit under the vending code for the city vending A and B permit spots. So there was clarification there. The other was updating a lot of the fee structure for the A permits, bringing that up to date to where now it's $1,500 a year, and restructuring the B permits as well, and also having a term limit of sorts on the B permits, where in the first year, a B permit would be $750 a year annually, and for the second year, it would be $1,125, or $1,125 a year, with the option to convert to an A permit at that point in time. The A permits, which currently are on the north side of East Union, will be moving to where all vending will be on the south side of East Union, which will take up essentially 10 spaces. So that's another change. And 2 last changes. One is insurance. Whereas before, the code read that they were to be bonded by the city, now it is they are to carry $100,000 in property and $300,000 in injury and wrongful death insurance. And that food trucks, motorized vehicles, will be now allowed on, in the A or B permit spots, whereas before it was only carts and wagons, non-motorized, single axle. So that's another change to where we're kind of opening up for other food vendors. It's a little more cost-effective to have, they're expensive, but still a little more cost-effective to have a food truck as opposed to having to have a vehicle and a trailer. So it just opens that up. That's pretty much it for the changes. Again, there's other subtle changes that are in there, which is just changing the text to better reflect the A's and B's and what they are. But that's the basic gist.
Thank you, Member Patterson. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
I will be voting for this. I think it makes many needed changes to what's probably somewhat of an ancient vending code. So thank you for your work on this. I have one concern with it, and that has to do with the parking spaces. We could be losing up to 10 parking spaces for much of the week compared to what we have now. And that would be if there would be no vending on that side, right? The situation now. If there were no vendors, we would have 10 spots people could park in.
No, the way the code reads, again, I was trying to paraphrase things down. The way the code reads is a B permit, or an A for that matter, will be issued to those who want to purchase one and to begin vending. Then they will be assigned a spot. So that spot will belong to them. If there is only 5 A's and B's, there will only be 5 spaces being used. Okay. Meanwhile, the remaining 10 spaces will not have a placard on them saying that this is a vending spot.
Okay.
As the permits are being issued, a placard will be hung on that meter saying that this is a vending spot. So it's actually opening up spots.
Yeah.
And conversely, the other side of the street will now, with freeing up the A's that are on the north side, those, many of them will become hopefully metered spots again to include handicap parking spaces.
Okay,
So
great.
that's a great question, but that has been thought through in terms of trying to continue to get the revenue that those meters bring in, which is, again, is about $1,500 a year if they were being paid from Worthington to when they are no longer
Okay,
monitored.
okay, so I confused that. I thought that from day one, they would be designated spots for vending, but it will be as the permits are issued.
Correct,
Beautiful.
correct.
In addition, we'll gain parking meters back on Court Street that are now an existing loading zone, and that loading zone is going on the north side.
Good.
Union.
But that's not part of this particular ordinance, that's just planning.
Correct. I was just
Yeah,
curious.
yeah. Just so we're clear.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Mayor?
The other thing I would point out again is that the B licenses will kind of be forced into being A licenses over time because their fees will go up over a period of several years. So therefore, the idea is you're getting into business or you're not at one point or another. So that's one of the substantial changes I think that's there.
So initially, you're supporting a business, and if they are productive, they can't just stay in a B slot. They need to move up to a A slot if they're a successful business.
Which is promoting.
Yeah, sure.
Incubating.
Incubating.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor of adoption of ordinance 11812 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Ordinance 11812 is adopted. Ordinance 12012, an ordinance providing for the issuance of not to exceed $300,000 of notes by the City of Athens, Ohio, in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying part of the cost of acquiring a new fire truck and related equipment and declaring an emergency. Introduced by Councilmember Nisley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption of ordinance 12012.
Second.
And this particular ordinance, as explained in the language, what we're going to do is have the city issue a note for $300,000, and this is for the portion of the amount remaining on the purchase of our newest ladder truck that last year was delivered and has been serving us well, and it was highly needed. It was a $1.2 million fire truck, and the amount that we had owed on it previous to last month was $400,000 that we had left. The $100,000 that we paid off to reduce the balance to this $300,000 note reflects $50,000 that the city is committing towards payment, paying down on the amount owed, and $50,000 that the university has paid to the city as their commitment to it, too. So we thank the university for that collaboration on it, and we're putting the money right back to paying down that balance on the note.
I appreciate that because I think some people in the audience may have been confused with new truck, like we were purchasing a new truck. This is the almost new truck that was purchased.
Our newest one.
Our newest
I think.
truck, yes.
Mayor Weil.
I thought Steve had something.
I just wanted to add, that our new truck has been put through its paces in the past couple months, and just to really kind of exemplify how critical that particular truck is.
Mayor.
And again, to reiterate, thanks to the university for putting up some money on this. It's a 5-year commitment of $50,000 per year. It's a $1 million truck and change. If you'll notice, the ordinance 12012 shows that the interest rate's going to be 0.35%, which is not bad. So we're getting a bargain there, and hopefully we'll pay it down fast, which will work out too.
Okay. Yeah, yes.
I too, to echo the comments that have been said, I want to applaud President McDavis's leadership as well and his commitment to communicating with our city and the mayor specifically. I know they meet on a regular basis. This is an example of, again, where collaboration, the two of us working together, benefits the community, the citizens. I encourage and applaud more of this in the future as well. Again, I'm echoing this and I'm supporting it.
I just want to say that I believe the last time it was used, it saved the university building. So I think it was money well spent by the university to help us with this thing. Of course, if that building had continued to burn, it would spread and been through the downtown. And it's good they were there and they got that thing out real quick.
And again, we've spent down already 600,000 of it because we saved our money for this project. I'm sure you've got a chance to see the truck, and it's a...
Got to ride in it, too.
Got to ride it, too, yes.
Moving on, all those in favor of ordinance 12012 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, the ayes have it. This ordinance is approved. Ordinance 12112, an ordinance providing for the issuance of not to exceed $800,000 of notes by the City of Athens, Ohio, in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying part of the costs of improvements to this municipality's wastewater treatment plant and declaring an emergency. Member Nisley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption of ordinance 12112.
Second?
And this, as is said, the city will be issuing a note for $800,000. A little bit of background information. This is for the engineering and design for the improvements to our wastewater treatment plant, and probably the city's largest project coming up, where we'll be improving on the facility, putting in new primary clarifiers and ultraviolet ways of cleaning the water. So a great improvement, much needed. And we'll be seeing, we've seen several ordinances already. This gets us through the financing part of the design and engineering, and then we'll be seeing other ordinances this coming year. We will be, so what this reflects is the original loan was for $850,000. We paid off $50,000 with an ordinance that we approved last month. So we owe the 800, and that's why we're issuing the note. And I do believe that we have the possibility later on, when we do our larger loan with the Ohio, the OWDA is what I know it as, and I'm drawing a blank on the what the acronym stands for.
I think we're using water pollution control.
Okay, Ohio Water Pollution Control
the other
money.
entity.
So when we do the larger loan for the major part of the construction to the improvements, we may have the possibility of rolling in this last part of this $800,000 note into it.
And as I understand, the improvements also will increase the capacity of the plant? Is that not?
Allow for smart, structured growth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a yes.
I think so. It also cleans it improves our process at the front end, the primary
Yeah.
clarifiers.
Definitely.
So that's the main function of it, but yes, it does bring us a little bit of capacity.
It's not working so hard.
Right.
And which should also increase a sort of quality of life issue on that side of town or those downwind, my understanding.
It better.
Hear it otherwise.
That's a lot of odor, remember.
That's how it's advertised, correct? It's supposed to do that.
All those in favor of ordinance 12112 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. This ordinance is passed. Ordinance 12212, an ordinance adopting a fringe benefits package for non-union personnel within the City of Athens and repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith and declaring an emergency. The Finance and Personnel Committee is introducing this.
And, Mr. President, I do have a question, because we amended this ordinance last week, so I think it should be a second reading tonight, and we can move it on to a third reading tomorrow, next week.
Okay. So this ordinance 122 has been read for the second time because it was amended. Now we are moving on to other second readings. Ordinance 12412, an ordinance amending ordinance 00807 and the Athens City Code establishing salaries for Athens City Council. Ordinance 12512, an ordinance to make appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the City of Athens, Ohio during the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2012. Ordinance 12612, an ordinance authorizing staffing levels a non-union pay scale, and slotting for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2013, repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith, and declaring an emergency. I'm sorry?
Just a typo, that's okay. 12512, the top of the ordinance says ending December 2012. Should be 13, I think. I don't know how to slip by. Sorry.
Do we all see the correction that the mayor is mentioning? In ordinance 12512, it's ending December 31st, 2013. We're just going to correct that as a typo. Ordinance 12712, an ordinance amending ordinance O-12405, reallocating revenues from the city income tax and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 12812, an ordinance amending ordinance O-3408, establishing the allocation of sewer service charges to the sewer debt fund, 758, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 13012, an ordinance levying special assessments for sidewalk improvements associated with the Grosvenor Street project, number 238, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 13112, an ordinance levying special assessments for sidewalk improvements associated with the North Court Area Infrastructure Project, number 259, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 13212, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a housing revolving loan fund administration agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 13312, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an administrative services contract with Hocking Athens Perry Community Action, HAPCAP, to administer the Housing Revolving Loan Fund and declaring an emergency. The declaring an emergency phrases that are on the end of most of these ordinances allow them to take effect immediately upon passage. Most ordinances take 30 days before they are effective. So that ends our action for tonight's meeting, I believe. Do we have any members of the audience who would like to speak to us? Okay. Did you want to?
It's a special session, so we actually don't have any of that.
Oh, okay. We're adjourned. Okay, we just finished the business. Well,